Okay, everybody, it's me. It's your buddy Steve Simonson, and as you can tell, I'm here in the White House. Well, I'm here in my office with the green screen, so that's just as good as the White House. And frankly, we don't set policy by standing in the White House anymore. Anyway, we send it out on Twitter, right? Is that right, Andy?
That's right.
So it's a funny thing that our world is revolving around Twitter these days. I thought it'd just be funny to start on the White House because it's quite irrelevant in the modern day policy setting. We just go to Twitter. That's all we need these days. So, Andy, you saw just in the last hour, I would say, the news came down that Trump is putting another 10% tariff on the last batch of China imports. That's roughly 300 billion a year. Did you see this announcement?
I did. I saw it, and I think the stock market had like a 600-point swing.
Yeah, it's crazy. So we're going to talk a little bit about Trump tariffs. I see all you attendees jumping on here. Kudos to you for being early and getting in there. We will have a maximum limit on this room, so if you're already in here, you don't want to lose your spot. A little fair warning. I've had some connectivity issues today, and we're hoping that I don't have those in the future. But I can tell you that, in fact, these guys will carry on while I get reconnected if it happens. So we're checking connectivity. I see some folks chiming in and telling us where they are. Tell us where you are for the folks out there.
Steve, where are you right now?
Actually, I'm back at my home base in Seattle. Hey, there's Liran. Everybody, his audio's working again.
My audio is working, and somebody just commented that, hey, I see you take calls from the car like I do. So I just spent the last 3 hours waiting for an oil change, an inspection on my car. So
sweet. All right.
Now I'm driving.
Just what we like to do. Yeah, it's a high bit of fun there. So I see Sydney, we got a g'day peeps, and Seattle, Illinois. There's Martin. Hey, Martin, nice to see you. Nick, good to see you online. Tony in Toronto. Ralph's down in Arizona. JD is in parts unknown, like the Ultimate Warrior. So that's pretty awesome. And of course, Andy over there in Pennsylvania. France is in the house. Oksana, nice to see you as well. And Tim is there in Chicago. So thanks for everybody letting us know we're broadcasting. As we get questions, we will try to answer those, but not. We're going to do them in little batches. We may stop at a certain point and go, any questions? And then we'll try to go through the question list. Melissa's helping us out there. Las Vegas in the house. Nice to see you, William. Melissa, any etiquette on questions? Anything you want to tell them about questions?
I think if we can, we'll bring those up as they're being addressed. So if there's questions that pertain to what Steve's currently talking about or a slide that's coming up, then we'll kind of wait for a couple similar questions, and then we'll address those as they come up.
I dig it. Yeah. And we're thrilled to have Andy and Liran joining us. Oksana's there. Melissa's there. And we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff. And we're going to get started here right now. Let's not delay. Let me see if I can share my screen and see what happens. Hey, Kim is there from Redondo Beach.
Kimberly is joining us in China.
Awesome.
Oh, that is right. Yeah, good point. Welcome aboard, Kimberly. You're going to love it.
Facebook people joining us as well. So hi to Kate and Robbie.
Excellent. Well, Melissa's going to try to monitor some of the chat stuff and keep us going. I'm going to try to keep us focused on delivering on my promise, which is to share the top 7 sourcing mistakes that I have seen and continue to see that Amazon sellers are making. And, this is the top 7 things. It's not an all-encompassing list, but I think they're the things that people should prioritize in terms of solving. And we appreciate the guys at Amazing Freedom joining us. All-encompassing. And I'm hearing myself twice. So if you guys hear me twice, let me know. So the first thing that I want to point out is that, let me make sure I've got this thing working, is that I don't like surprises. And you shouldn't like them either. Now, I'm not really talking about surprise parties or any of those rare surprises that turn out to be positive.
The route is being calculated.
I'm talking about GPS surprises, for example. No, just kidding, Liran. Really, any surprise that you don't like to have. For example, Trump today announced, hey, 10% on the other $300 billion worth of exports we haven't yet thrown tariffs on. And that's a surprise. Nobody knew that was going to happen today, unless Andy's on the inside loop. Andy, did you know?
No, unfortunately I didn't.
Yeah, Liran, were you in the loop? I know you're pretty connected.
I'm pretty connected, but no, I didn't get the tweet.
Okay, yeah. So that's the issue. So I got to update my Twitter feed. The reality is, surprises in terms of business that you can't plan around are the things that you should try to avoid. And I represent surprises with a cucumber, right? And in this case, a cucumber is an unwanted China surprise. So this is all you have to think about is you don't want the cucumbers. You don't want an unwanted China surprise because they're rarely positive. And I can tell you this very week, despite all of our experience, we had a surprise. Urgently in Vietnam, I received a call from the leader of my China team, William, and he's like, hey, we've got this issue with this forwarder. You know, we didn't expect this. Here's the challenge. Here's the situation. How do we solve it? And, you know, at the end of the day, it was only a couple $1,000s, but those are the kind of surprises that really can eat away at your margins and make a negative difference in your business. So surprises should be avoided. And that's why I'm sharing these things here today. Any words of wisdom from Liran before we get started?
No, but the only thing I would add is that, you know, I see that you are preparing for surprises because I know this week you've been to Vietnam, then I saw, then now you're back home, but you are actively taking steps to stay ahead of the surprises, right? And I think that's part of what you want to do in business.
Boy, that's totally right. And that's totally the point of us pointing out these common 7 mistakes that people are making, because if you guys know about them, then you can take measures to avoid them. Andy, any final words before I dive in here?
No, sounds good. I'm ready to get into it.
All right, let's rock. So first of all, full disclosure, I don't know nothing about nothing. I like to be very upfront about that. Now, despite my 30 years in business, that's owning my own businesses, I bought and sold stuff, I start pretty much any conversation or any meeting, any topic with the premise that I don't know nothing about nothing. Because if I don't, then I bring too many biases in. And I actually encourage you guys to adopt that same principle today. Even if you've already bought stuff from China, even if you're already doing global trade, just take a step back and let the information flow in, and then you decide how to interpret it. I've been doing this on my own for 30 years. I've been traveling back and forth to China for over 15 years. I think my first trip to China was in roughly 2002, and I started buying directly in China in 2001. And over the time, by the way, we've racked up some points on the scoreboard. We're very close to $1 billion of cumulative turnover during that time, probably a little over that, but I haven't run the numbers to be sure. So I'd say close to $1 billion in total revenue and turnover for my companies and the things that are in our direct control. And along the way, we've bought at least $300 million worth of stuff from China alone. And that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of experience, and I still don't know nothing about nothing. And really, fundamentally, people turned to me as an expert. Last week, or maybe it's 2 weeks ago, Bloomberg ran an article where I was one of their quoted resources about sourcing and about Amazon and China and things like that. I've been interviewed many times by other places, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, and many, many more. I don't like to get into that stuff. I just want to say that I know a couple things, but I still start with the premise that I don't know nothing about nothing. And I encourage you to as well. Liran and Andy, I'm thrilled to see these guys on the call with us, and we're partnering up to go to China together, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on in the call. So there's an open loop for you guys keeping score at home. We're going to come back to that. But I'm really excited to have them on the call and partner up with them. We're going to have some fun. So here's how I see the typical Amazon seller situation. So you're the Amazon seller. You're in front. You're super excited. You're catching fish. Those are customers. In this analogy, that big fat king salmon is a customer, right? And we're thrilled. We're excited. We're slaying them, right? We're getting our full bounty each and every year, especially around Christmas time or Prime Day. So we're really excited. But I want to tell you that in some ways you're blissfully unaware of trouble lurking in the future. And that's that bear behind you. What would you say if that bear was behind you and you didn't know it, Andy?
Yeah, definitely. You're in trouble.
Yeah, you got trouble behind, and you're looking for trouble. Liran, what do you think about that?
I think that if you didn't know the bear was behind you, you would say nothing and you'd instantly die without knowing.
Well, the reality is this
So
guy has no idea that bear's behind him, and that's why he's blissfully unaware. And that's my point to you guys. So Amazon sellers, I love entrepreneurs. I think Amazon remains today the very best opportunity on the planet for you to build and create your own business. So everything I say, and I'm going to be talking about some very serious topics, this takes nothing away from the opportunity. It just means that there's a difference between, there's a difference between success and failure, and it's not whether or not you're a human, right? To say any human can go be successful in e-commerce or on Amazon is not an accurate statement. But any human that does the following, learns and applies skills and is diligent and is willing to put in the time and effort and so on, that's the difference maker. That's who's going to win. But just know that there's trouble lurking out there, and I want you guys to be aware of the trouble. This is how you plan for the trouble. I regularly recommend Paul Midler's book, Poorly Made in China. When I first read that book several years ago, it was like reading the last 15 years of my life. There's funny stories, there's sad stories, and by the way, the book's not about me. Paul's just lived the same kind of experiences, and it tells you in visceral detail some of the things to look out for. Have you guys ever heard of that book?
I've never heard of it.
Okay, good. So now there's a gift to you guys. So I'm telling you, if you haven't read that book, you really are not prepared to trade in China. And trading is a global phenomenon. That's what we do when we buy and we sell. We're trading goods and services and money. You must read that book if you really want to get in the game. And he also has a follow-on book called What's Wrong with China, that if you're interested in the Trump war, the tariff war, the China-U.S., that What's Wrong with China is a very good meta look at the situation as well if you want to dive into deeper detail. If you don't, you just want to focus on your business, read Poorly Made in China. Now, here's my mission, and I really appreciate everybody who's joining us. I see so many live people here, and I wanted you to know our mission combined cumulatively is to help level the playing field for you, the Amazon seller, by telling you the truth about real global trade. Can anybody do it? Yes. Can anybody do it in a world-class way? No. You really got to be prepared. You got to be smart. You have to think about these things. And if you do it all right and you get it to a level that we like, then this can be you. Instead of you being afraid, you can have a good cooperative partner with your China factory, and you can have lots of happy moments in the future instead of being scared and being paralyzed in fear. That sounds better, right, Andy?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Liran, what do you think? A pretty good picture, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's one of the best Photoshop jobs ever. So I want to just tell you guys that
All right, see it now.
The mission really is to take you from the unprepared, unarmed status that you may have now, that you may be living now. Because if you think that China factories are your friends, I want you to know.
Oh dear, he warned us about this. Okay, we're all in suspense because he said, I want you to know. And now
He wants you to know that China factories are not your friends, I think is what was coming.
I think you might be right about that, but I'm so in suspense. So this actually happened in our all hands call, guys, just a little bit ago. His connection is a little bit iffy, and so if history repeats itself, he will jump back in here in about 2 minutes. So to learn more, please subscribe to. But as he was talking, I noticed that we had some chats coming in, and so I just wanted to say good job, Joanne, for reading the book already, and good job to William for purchasing the book. It really is a very good book. So
There he is. Somebody said for the next part, subscribe to.
Yeah. I was trying to quote them. They were the funny one, not me.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Steve.
All right. Can you guys hear me again?
We can hear you.
Yes.
All right. My apologies. I can't tell you the amount of frustration. I've even had them out to try to repair this thing. It's a 1 gigabit fiber connection. I'm doing the best I can. I now have switched to my cell phone, just to be clear. So, all right. So we've already gotten past, and the point that I was saying I want you to know is I want you to know that, with preparation and with diligence and with skill building, you can be prepared. That's really the mission that we have in front of us. So without further ado, this is like the least sexy slide ever, right? Because as soon as I talk about policies, requirements, laws, regulations, and rules, people are like, "Ugh, I don't want any of that." So Melissa, I only heard a little of Liran. Is that me or is that him?
I'm going to drive off the road, Steve. Sorry.
That's not you, Steve.
That was me.
Okay, well, don't drive off the road, number one,
No,
and also don't look at the slides.
Watching the slide might make me drive off the road, is what I was saying.
We give you permission not to drive off the road. Slides.
All right, thank you.
So the point is, I don't want you guys to lose interest because we're talking about operational details. I want you to really focus up. I know that everybody just likes to talk about marketing, but these are important things. Pay close attention. So why did Trump announce additional round of tariffs? Why has he announced any of these tariffs? Why is all this so-called trade war stuff happening? And this is the number one reason why. If you look from the year 2000 to the present, which is, you can look at around 2020, the vector between the United States and China is catching up. You also see India on a nice incline, although even if you jump to 2030, India is still a fraction, maybe 5 times less than China. And although the U.S. is growing, by the way, the EU has a similar growth curve to the U.S., although slightly less. But the point is, China's gathering a lot of steam, and they've done so over the last 20 years. That's economically aggressive policies that have reaped some of those benefits. China is not shy about saying, we want to steal your intellectual property, or you actually have to share your intellectual property if you want to set up in business in China and do business here. And they're also not afraid to say made in China 2025 is a real thing. They don't want anybody to make anything except them. And so I'm not getting into the individual politics or party politics, but I'm telling you what's happening in China versus the rest of the world is important. And I think that the trade stuff is not going to stop. Doesn't mean China's not a good opportunity to buy. It just means be prepared. Here's the most important thing that you can notice. Those charts, the first charts look kind of close together, but just look at that percent of change in GDP from the year 2007. This is just 2007 to 2014. In 7 years, the U.S. only went up 7.7%, and China was up 78, almost 70, around 78%. So the point is, this is why these tariffs are happening. The United States is trying to rein in. Frankly, I think Canada and the EU should get on board with trying to rein in China a little bit so that the trade is more bilateral instead of one way, right? Right now, it's all one direction. China, we buy in the United States, whatever it is, 800, 900, well, it's more than $1 trillion, but I think the deficit is around 700 or 800 billion a year at its high points. So, which was ironically just this past year. So the reason why these tariffs are happening is a macroeconomic reality, and where there's no getting around it. So I just dived into reason number one why Amazon sellers are making a mistake. And but I'll let Andy and Liran jump in here. Before we talk about the specific reasons, any global big picture stuff you want to talk about, Andy?
No, I mean, I think you're right on. And, like you were just doing, there's a lot of folks that are trying to look at sourcing in other countries, right? And so, I mean, that's just the nature of what's going on right now.
Yeah, and listen, I was just in Vietnam for a couple weeks. For those who don't know, we've already sourced in Vietnam for the last 3 years in an aggressive way. We're buying millions from Vietnam, but it's just not. This is the first time I went there, and it's like looking back in time, 15, 20 years to how China was 15, 20 years ago. It really is. And so there's lots of opportunities. We have to diversify the chain, but it's most important to know the entire market. You can't diversify somewhere else until you know what the price is in China, until you know what are the tariffs, how will they impact me, what are the alternatives. These are all things. And by the way, this goes hand in hand with reason number one why people make mistakes is they don't start with a desired result. They don't start with a strategy. And that's what this slide is talking about. It's ideal if you already have a good idea of the product that you want to bring in, what its position in the market is, maybe some of its expected sales and margins. Starting with the end in mind is, I think, a mistake that people too often make. They don't start with the end in mind, I should say. And I think it's really important that you get very agnostic when it comes to products. You should kill the losers as soon as possible and double down on the winners, right? And the way you know this is you started with a strategy. Whether it was the design or planning or procurement side, you had this vision, and if it can't achieve that vision, you got to kill it. I mean, literally, it's just needs to be taken out to the pasture and put down, because otherwise you're going to spend money trying to take a weak product and strengthen it while your strong product is being starved for capital. That's the offset. Andy, have you ever had a situation where a slower moving item needed to be killed to help a faster moving item?
Yeah, early on, I had some actually really good products that unfortunately, they were my winners. They were my home run products, and I just put them on autopilot, and I started chasing after other products instead of building out my winners. So like I tell people right now, this was a brand I started 5 years ago. It could probably be a $4 or $5 million brand right now. And unfortunately, it's only a $1 million brand because I didn't do exactly what you're talking about. I didn't build out those winners. I started chasing after other products and then just kind of let those basically go on autopilot, which you can never do.
Well, I think that's really well said. And we've all done that, by the way. It's almost a natural thing that we have, that when we develop this product, we almost treat it like a little baby. We're going to watch it grow up and go off to college and have grandbaby products and so forth. And it's like, forget that. If the thing doesn't work, kill it and move on to something that works better. That's just natural economics. Liran, I can't see you, but do you want to weigh in on this? I'm going to say that's a no. So the point is, if you start with a strategy, then you can define what the buying process is. Then you can define, how you're going to put together the merchandising of that product, the marketing of that product, and all of the relevant things that need to achieve the goal, right? You have a sales goal, you should have a profit or at least contribution goal for a product. So starting with a strategy, as simple as that may sound, is too often overlooked. And even if you have everything working across all the functions of your business, marketing, finance, operations, etc., if that thing doesn't work the way you thought it should, you gotta eject it. Liran, were you trying to jump in? Okay, the robot Liran has he's taken over the actual Liran. If the real Liran will return, then we'll have him back on. But right now he's turned into a Terminator. Liran? All right, we'll wait because his connectivity's as bad as mine was. So the other thing I don't want people to forget is when you start with a strategy, here's an idea. Put the customer at the very beginning of that strategy. How is this product going to benefit the customer? I think so many times people are like, how much money can I make? What's the throughput? It's like, no, what is this doing for the customer? That's what makes something noteworthy. And noteworthy means that is what people think about reviews. That's how they start to get excited and leave you reviews. So starting with the customer is really, really important. But I don't want you to forget how you talk and deal with the factory. Long term, the factory needs to be as engaged as a customer. You, as a matter of fact, are a salesperson. You have to sell the customer and you have to sell the factory on why you're the right either brand for the customer to buy from or the right partner that the factory can engage with and double down on long term. There are lots of things because those factories can sell to anybody. They can sell to Walmart or Target or Office Depot or whoever. Why should they consider you? Why are you good for them? And why is it a good match? And by the way, if it's not a good match at the factory level, it's not a good match. Don't try to force that any more than anything else here. So starting with the desired result means instead of flying by the seat of your pants, try to write some stuff down. I'm going to bring in this product or these products over this period of time. here's when I'm going to launch them. Here's my expectations for sales, profit, etc. And then you back into the deployment of those products. Liran, you want to try to jump in? I see you now.
Yes, and you can hear me?
A little bit.
Okay.
All right, and everybody, I hope you appreciated Liran's comments there. They're wide-reaching. Liran, we know you got lots to say, but your connectivity's still not there. Melissa, are you monitoring the chats and questions and things?
I am. We have just a few comments on what you guys are saying, but no questions so far.
Okay, no problem. We'll come back. I'll get to the comments if I can. And yeah, blah, blah, blah. So point number one, if you don't start with a desired result and you don't have a strategic look at things, you can have things come up. So everybody who thinks that you know, China problems are only recent problems, here's one from 1994 where Crayola had to recall some crayons for the small potential problem of they could be poisonous to kids. And this is not the kind of surprise you want, right? And I can tell you that if you have an unexpected China surprise, you will not like your life for that time period, right? And it doesn't even matter the nature of that surprise. It matters what you do about it, how you react to it, and how you recover from it. Hey, there's a cucumber, everybody. That's an unexpected China surprise, and you don't want one. Believe me, you don't want one. Andy, what do you think?
Oh, no, yeah, definitely. And, you know, unfortunately, working with suppliers, even, you know, suppliers I've worked with for 3 years, every container contains a surprise. And, you know, suppliers that I think I have a trusted relationship with for whatever reason, they have a different mindset when it comes to business. They don't have a Western mindset. I'll give you a real quick example. So I have a product that you plug in, and my supplier changed out. I ordered 1,000 units. They changed out 500 of the cords that you plug into my product. Well, unfortunately, the ends were different on those 500. And so when the customer was trying to unplug it, it sparked, and it, like, you know, did like a mini explosion. I think the customer was really friendly about it. But, you know, that was something they just did. They'll make decisions like that, and you have no idea, right? Until you get feedback from your customers. But those are some of the surprises you deal with.
Unwanted China surprise right there. Thank you for that, Andy. Liran, you want to jump in? So let's test your robot skills.
How are my robot skills? Any better?
Sounds good right now.
Or no?
Oh, well, we can hear you, but apparently you can't hear us.
All
right.
Can you hear? You can't hear me, obviously.
We can.
No, you're good.
Let's keep waiting. I'm driving.
All right.
Okay, we'll carry on. We'll keep moving.
Okay.
So I'm going to move on to point number 2. So point number 1 is not starting with the end in mind, or not starting with the result you want or strategy. Point 2 is lack of understanding. Now, this is easy to say, but I want you guys to beware of using slang with Chinese or any supplier, really any supplier anywhere. All of this really does apply globally. I see every time I'm in a sourcing situation, I see Western people, Americans, Canadians, UK, Australians, we tend to use slang, we use idioms, and we use little phrases that have meaning to us. They have no meaning to them. And it's really a dangerous thing to use slang. So, you know, when you say things like, you know, we really want to do a good job on this, they understand that. But they also don't care about that. You know, saying we should do a good job means nothing to them. So the way you quantify that good job is the things that we'll talk about here coming up. So lack of understanding. If you've ever texted or emailed a close friend and you had them take the message the wrong way, right, because you can't read tone in text, that's a good example of how China thinks, right? And really any foreign supplier, if they're not native in your tongue, you shouldn't assume anything that they understand anything that you're saying. You should assume the opposite, that they don't in fact understand. And if they don't, you know, if you can have a close friend or somebody take a text the wrong way, imagine if somebody doesn't speak the native language you do, right? It's really easy to have that situation. And I have to tell you that it's not just a small thing to have this lack of understanding. You can have massive, massive problems if you don't have everything very clearly defined in writing and as a process. The other thing is I want people to be aware of is when you ask people a question, particularly in Asia, they will often say yes. Yeah, yes, we can. And as a matter of fact, in Chinese, the word is kei, kei. You know, and you say, hey, can you do it? And the boss says kei, and the translator says, yes, we can. And what they mean could be anywhere from, yeah, no problem, that's something we do every day, all the way to no way in hell we're going to do that. And the minute you leave this office, we're going to forget we ever had this conversation. I mean, that is the full range of what yes can mean. It is a absolute, clear, well understood situation that the word yes is not to be trusted. And I know that sounds
Steve.
weird. Yeah, Liran.
Yeah. So can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. So I mean, why is that? Why is the culture like that? I mean, is that something, I don't know if it's worth spending time on, but like, I mean, what's the end game benefit of them telling you yes and then not being able to do something for you? I mean, so
first of all, there is no end game benefit, and I think looking for logic in the Asian yes is not useful to us. There is no logic from a Western perspective. I'm sure they have their own point of view as to why this makes sense. In many ways, it's the simple answer is they don't want the conflict, and so they'll say yes, and then later they'll incrementally tell you the way it really is. So if all of you guys are aware that yes is a danger, the way you avoid just getting a flat yes is, okay, you've said yes, how are you going to do that? When exactly? You know, if you're asking, can they make this model, do you have the mold already? Do you already have experience with this? What can you show me? And you just keep asking follow-up questions that are detailed and they're object-oriented to a level that they have to demonstrate some factual proof that the yes can actually be a yes. This is the bitter irony of it is sometimes yes actually means yes, and other times yes means no, 100% no, and the why is actually quite irrelevant to me at this stage. It's like I got bigger problems to deal with. So this is one of those critical culture differences that if you don't understand it, you are not prepared. You're not ready to do business. So don't use slang, beware of yes, and I will just tell you, whatever assumption that you make, okay, and this is one you might want to write down, whatever assumptions you make about the way it is are your fault. They're just your fault because you assumed something doesn't mean it's true. In your mind, you made this assumption and you decided it was reasonable. You decided, well, of course, anybody who's looking at this objectively would have the same assumption. Doesn't matter. It's your fault, right? And so I'm just telling you, if you assume something and it wasn't written down and agreed to, you just saying something in email and them just kind of moving on is not the same as them agreeing to it. So if you don't have an affirmative agreement on a specific point, it's your fault. It's your fault. And this means we have responsibilities here. We are sophisticated global traders, right? Even if you're relatively new, if you've been doing this, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, even 10 years, you're still getting your feet under you. Just know it's your responsibility. And I have had a supplier, after 10 years, they made an error, not an error, they pulled a fast one. After 10 years and probably somewhere between $25 and $35 million worth of business over that 10 years, they pulled a fast one on us. All of our processes couldn't catch it. It was something beyond our control. And now it's a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. So there is no safe zone. You would think that we were past the safe zone at some point. There is no safe zone. And this doesn't mean you should be scared. This just means you should be prepared. Hey, that rhymes. Andy.
I'll just add, like we always now ask multiple clarifying questions when we write out our specs so that they understand. I'll give you another real example for us. We have a product that deals with water and it has stainless steel on it. We just expected that they were going to use, I forget what it is, like 305 or something stainless steel, right? Well, we get the product and, a week later it's starting to rust. And we say, hey, did you use the 305? And they're like, no, you didn't ask us to use the 305. oh, okay, so you just automatically put on the cheaper grade, steel. So now it's always ask clarifying questions and then give exact specs.
Boy, I couldn't have said it better myself. And so that's a very good point. I see Liran, he looks frozen, but quite good. Yeah, he's got that fresh haircut. Yeah.
Thank you. You can't hear me?
We can actually hear you right now. If you want to jump in with a bit of wisdom.
Yeah, no. So the wisdom is that I agree. Like doing inspections on every order, not to get safe. That same thing happened to me. I got safe with a supplier and ended up costing me a bunch of money during Q4. And I switched suppliers to a better one, so it actually caused a positive change for me. But it was partly to trusting a supplier too much.
Yeah. Listen, I think that's a very good story, and I could tell you many, many stories like that. By the way, we're not alone. Disney, Mattel, Thomas the Tank Company, all of them had to recall tens of millions of toys because they weren't following processes. They were not doing what I said to do. They made some assumptions, like you're not going to use lead paint on our toys. And what does that mean? That's an unwanted China surprise. And we don't want unwanted China surprises. If you have a cucumber in your life, it's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. Now, I like pickles, but cucumbers, forget about it. I'm not. Okay, we're moving on to number 3. Number 3 is you don't actually have a purchasing system. Now, what do I mean? I mean that if you are emailing your supplier with, I want 1,000 of those things that you quoted me, $4 a unit for, that's not a purchase order. That's an email. And that is insufficient. That is not a system. That is, let me be honest. Those things happen. I've done those types of things over the years, but it's not a real way to run a business. I really encourage you guys to have a system, for your sample process. How are you going to, decide which sample to go with? And then once you have that sample process complete, you could have a purchasing system, very much like the one I'm showing here, which is where you create a purchase order. Somebody internally that has control approves the purchase order. So if you have a large organization, maybe you have a merchandising team, they're making the PO. The finance person or you as the owner says, yeah, I'm approving this. And then you make sure that it matches the PI. This is the pro forma invoice that China will always send you. Whatever's on that PI that's what they intend to deliver. If there's any variation, it's your problem. It's your fault. There's nothing they're going to do about it because they're like, hey, we sent you the PI, you didn't change it. And so those really have to match. If there's financing, then you decide how to deal with the payables. If you're wiring money, then you start wiring money and pay for it. And then you receive the purchase order into your system so that you actually have the inventory in your system. I'm going to guess that most of you guys don't have inventory in your systems. And that, again, I'm not passing judgment. I'm just telling you, at some point you got to get there. You got to have a system so that when you issue a purchase order, all the details are on the purchase order. And I mean all the details are on the purchase order. Every specification, every line item, every little detail you expect to have out of that product better be on that PO. Otherwise, it just doesn't exist. And we'll talk more about that here in a minute. The point is you have a system, then you measure the results from the system, and then you learn and optimize that system, right? If you see the same situation occurring again and again, you make modifications to the system. Very clear, very straightforward. Any feedback on that, Liran or Andy?
No, but I remember, I guess I'll kind of bring this up, but I remember you were talking to me about creating something like this for sellers. Maybe that's still in the works, but most kind of smaller brand sellers are not utilizing these types of systems to send a PO. But I think even if you don't have a system, you still want a very clear written guidelines of what's expected in an order, quality, quality control criteria.
Yeah. So just to be clear, a system can be a system that is in writing. It doesn't have to be a computer software piece of, it just has to be a system. You have to have kind of a known input and known output or expected output. The Parsimony.com is a full ERP system. It's something we've been working on for a couple of years. And I'll just be honest with you, I use it. I have it running 6 or 7 of my companies. It's very robust. It's very comprehensive. The issue is the learning curve is really, really high, and we just don't know if we can make money selling it to small guys. That's really what's held us up from releasing it. But it doesn't matter the software, the system. Make sure that whatever you do, even if it's in writing, that it's a predictable thing. You could make a comprehensive purchase order using Google Documents and then send that PDF to your supplier, match it to the PI. When the stuff comes in, you make sure that you know where your inventory is. There's lots of ways to do this. QuickBooks actually has extensions you can do. Xero may have something as well. So it doesn't have to be software driven, although if you're going to scale, ultimately it will be software driven. That's the only way to keep track of stuff. So having a purchasing system so that you know, here's what we're ordering, here's the exact details, here's when we expect it, all of those things written down, really, really important. I cannot stress how many problems have been resolved by referring back to the purchase order and going, hey, we said right there, this is what we wanted. And suppliers and reasonable suppliers will often go, all right, we see, we made a mistake. How do we make it up to you on the next order or with a discount or whatever now? So if you don't create these things, you're going to have problems. And, China actually has had all kinds of problems over the years with all kinds of things. That one, they actually put melamine in baby milk, and that's dangerous, right? So my point is, if they're willing to put in baby milk that's sold in China, melamine, do you think they're willing to tweak your specs a little bit for optimize their profit? As a culture, that's true. And just to be clear, anybody who thinks, oh, Steve's mean to Chinese people, I love Chinese people. I have a great Chinese team. I have many suppliers I'm very, very close to. This has nothing to do with the people. This has to do with the culture. And it's an adversarial trading culture. This is a really important point to get through your head. It's an adversarial deal. You have money, they want it. They have product, you want it. Now it's a battle to see who's going to come out. Now, ideally, the battle ends up with both parties coming out even, right? But this idea that, somehow that they are going to be your best friend and they're going to take care of you and they'll do all the things I think it's immature to think that way. It's naive to think that way. In the same way that it would be naive to think that if their plumbing breaks, you're going to show up and fix their toilet, right? That's the same thing. That it's unreasonable expectation. So, Andy or Liran, any comments here? Because I'm hitting this point kind of hard.
Yep. No, I think it's good.
Okay. All right. So we'll carry on. So, point number 4: not enough detail. So Liran talked about this, so after you have a purchasing system so that you can have a systemic way to put the orders in and a systemic way to receive those, it's so important to make sure that the specifications are clearly defined. And Andy talked about this a little bit earlier, but I can't tell you how detailed these specs need to be. If you are writing things like high quality on your specifications, you can forget that. That's not a thing. You have to write things that are quantifiable, and that means you have to have some way of testing it. So if you are buying, a fabric, you can say how many stitches per inch. You can say the weight of the fiber. You can say what is the fiber made of? What are the contents of that fiber? Andy talked about the stainless steel. You can give exact alloy numbers to go, I want this alloy number. On some products, we actually have our inspectors go in with a gloss meter and test the gloss level of the product. They have a range from like 11 to 15% gloss level, and there's a gloss meter. You just put it on and it shows you the gloss level. And if they are outside that range, they're off spec. That's the level of detail I'm talking about. And so if you don't know the specifics of your material, things like thickness, gauge, density, as I talked about, stitches per inch, if you're not defining things like the zippers, the buckles, right? What kind of zipper is it? Does it go one direction? YKK is the best, but it costs them more money. And if you don't say YKK, you don't say what direction it should go, you don't say how many teeth per inch or whatever, then they'll just figure out whatever works best for them. Now, I want to tell you, again, this is a difficult truth, but it's absolutely true. The Chinese factories will do whatever you ask them to do. So that's the upside of it. But they will also do things that you don't ask them to do if you don't define it. That's the downside.
Steve, there's a
Please.
question. There's a good question I saw in the chat, which
Okay.
is, how do you figure out what should the specs be? I'm starting out. I want to bring a backpack to market. It's got new material. It's got zippers. Where do I go to figure this stuff out? To what to tell the factory to make sure I get what is quality or what I
So I
expect
think
in quality?
it's a really good question. And let me just tell you that when you're just starting out, it's a journey. Your first spec sheet won't be as good as your second one because you're gonna order something, you're gonna make some assumption, and then it didn't happen. You're gonna go, oh, that's on me. I didn't write it down. And as you see on this slide, I say if it's not in writing, it's not happening. At least not the way you thought it would. So the way you get started is I will go to a laboratory and I will say, like, this is a new product to me. I don't know what to ask. So what test would you recommend running on this laboratory? Not only will the laboratory tell you the test, but they'll tell you the specific name of the test. You know, this is an EN 1394, and we're going to test this, and it should be within this range to meet your quality standards. And laboratories are really good at being able to start you off with some tolerances, some things to ask. But you should ask by default, what material is this made of? If you're making a backpack, what is the fabric that's being used?
And I think also modeling other successful quality products and shipping that into your factory. I've done that before. I bought a product here, liked the quality, sent that over to my factory in China and said, I want the same, materials and quality as this product.
That's very good.
A little bit of the way to do it without knowing.
It's a very good start, and really, Google's a pretty good friend in this case. Go search for, if you're doing backpacks, search some big brand's backpack, and see if you can find the spec sheet or the MSDS sheet. You're going to start finding things that need to be discussed. But really, every single component on a product, like we talked about zippers, buckles, clasps. If you have some plastic clasp, you should be defining what's the width, depth, length, what's that made of? And really, at some point, you're going to take it right down to every level of the chemical composition. Some suppliers will tell you, and you'll say, hey, do you have some existing specs from another customer that you can share with me so I know what to look for? But be open about it and talk to them about it. And I've talked to everybody and try to learn as much as I can, and just know that version 1 is fine. It's a good place to begin, but version 2 will be better. Version 3 will be still better. By the way, by the time you're to version 2 or 3, you look back at 1 and go, whoo, that was embarrassing. I'm surprised we got away with that. So it's an evolution. So if you don't know anything today, start with something and then bolt on from there. You think that's helpful?
Yes, very.
So the number one thing I can tell you about specifications is they should be, specific. So material names, there should be tolerances when it comes. You can't say high quality, but you can say must meet this indentation test result, or must meet this flammability test result, or this formaldehyde level, or that, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of different ways, and
there are also different types of quality standards for inspections, right? Like specific sort of levels that are allowed and that are not allowed when you're doing an inspection.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's really, the more your specs are developed, the more you'll put in those acceptable ranges. So one piece of advice I would give anybody, when you get kind of a master sample that is approved, you typically, I think we'll typically get 3 to 4 copies of that master sample. Our inspector, whoever we assign or approve, will sign every one of those copies of the master sample. Because let me just tell you, sometimes those samples get switched out on you. And they'll go, hey, it matches, what's the problem? And you're like, where's the signature of our guy? It doesn't exist. So make sure that you have a master sample. We typically will have one at the factory for their own internal inspection. Our inspector will have one, and then we'll have either one in our China office and one in the US, or there's 2 kind of floating around outside of the system so that we can always check them for the master quality. So master samples are really, really important. And then again, as your specifications get tighter and tighter, they will get better. And you use labs from time to time to validate those tests. So your inspectors can measure things like length and width and thickness and and visual things, and maybe even some, moisture or gloss or other things that are pretty mellow, but they can't measure formaldehyde in a production setting. So from time to time, you have to send that off to a lab and just test if your product needs this requirement met, that, what's the formaldehyde emission. And our general deal with the supplier is, if it passes, we pay for the test. And if it fails, not only do they pay for the test, but they got to figure out how to deal with the production run. So does that help, Liran?
Looks like
maybe. I'll assume he did. I'll assume it did help. In fact, I'll speak for him. Boy, that was the best answer I ever heard, Steve. Oh,
well, it must have been, because we do have a couple follow-up questions, Steve. So,
okay, please help me with those, Melissa.
All right. So KG asked, how do we get the supplier to agree? Do we write up a contract? And then he also raised his hand. So I just wanted to invite him to type in here and let us know if he has something else here he wants to add.
Okay, so if the question is, how do you get suppliers to agree, we're talking about agree to specifications. And the answer is, you put them on the purchase order. You're like, I want this many products at this price, meeting all of these specifications. That's like a contract. And when you do that, the supplier, that's their opportunity to accept or decline your specifications. If they accept it, they are essentially agreeing to it. And there are ways to create China enforceable purchase orders. And you guys can go to Empowery.com/contact, and they can email you a copy of an example China purchase order. And if we have time at the end, I can tell you more about how to get those things done just the right way. So fundamentally, asking your supplier. Now, by the way, we're shopping a product right now, and we've given them a tolerance level, and they're like, we can't meet that. I mean, they just told us we can't meet that. And so now our choice is, do we go with their lower tolerance, which makes a worse product, or do we go to Taiwan and pay a higher price to get the better tolerance? That's a strategic choice we have to make, right? So, but when you're quantifying things and when you're talking about specific details, that's when you're going to get a more honest discussion with suppliers at the end of the day. Very few suppliers, and I'll say this proactively, very few suppliers will give you an absolute lie. They might talk around stuff, they might leave stuff out of the equation, but very few are just going to flat out lie to you. And certainly not intentionally. I think most suppliers really want their end game, as Liran alluded to earlier, their end game is to have you be a high volume, long-term customer. And so they really do want to tell the truth. Any other questions we need to hit right now, Melissa?
Tony Cigar, I hope I'm saying that right. He says, everybody talks about bundling products together. Are trading companies better for this rather than trying to always work with only the factory?
So it's an open question. It kind of depends on how complex you want to do. You can either buy the stuff at, let's just say the bundle has 3 items. You could buy that at 3 different factories and send it to the last guy for packaging and bundling. They'll be happy to do that at some small fee. You can use a trading company. There are times where trading companies make sense, and we may get into that a little bit later on. But I want to make sure that we keep marching forward. So very good question, Tony. But there's no simple answer. It's whatever works. You can do either or both, frankly. So if you don't have specs, what happens is you can have surprises. And, melamine in pet food is not a great surprise. And once again, you don't want a cucumber. You do not want a surprise. And even though these are meant to be kind of, little tension relievers, those surprises really do scare the crap out of you. And when you first get them, like a friend of mine, he decided on the factory's advice, he was going to use an HS code or HTC code, the harmonized code that people use. And the factory said, hey, just use this one. It's 0% duty. This is before the Trump stuff happened. And I'm like, hey, I've been using this HS code for years. It's 8%. That's what I do. And he's like, well, I prefer 0% instead of 8%. And I'm like, I don't know. This is what I do. And so he proceeded to use the 0%. We really did tell him he should stick with the 8%. And he went along his merry way, and we bought whatever amount of money through him. He was a trading company. And a year and a half into it, he got a bill from customs. They did an intensive examination. They found that his product should have had the 8% duty on it. and he owed $175,000. Right? That's an unwanted, unexpected China surprise. Just so you know, if you're the importer of record into America, there is no limitation to the look-back period. Just because you got it in and didn't pay duty today doesn't mean you won't pay duty in the future. So if you don't know the HS code, a pro tip is you can actually send your product into customs and have them in writing. I don't remember the fee. It's $250 or $450. In writing, they can tell you what code you should code your product under. That then at least eliminates most of your liability. So don't have surprises. Okay, we talked a little bit about inspections earlier, but the lack of oversight is really a problem that many of these prior slides come down to. If you're placing an order and you're shipping them without at least a pre-shipment inspection, you're making a huge mistake. Now, I've heard Amazon sellers, and by the way, they lecture me. They're like, Steve, I've been ordering products for 2 years, and I haven't had a single problem. I think you're making a lot of noise about nothing. And I say, hey, God bless, good luck to you. You have so much experience, and I should learn from you. But what I really mean is you don't know what's coming. You're going to have a problem, and you don't know it yet. And your lack of inspection will be a problem later. Absolutely. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not even next year, but at some point it'll come back on you. And it's a small amount of money to pay for a pre-shipment inspection. I absolutely insist that people do it, or otherwise you're just not being sophisticated about your supply chain. Inspections matter. Now, the better the specs are, the more they'll matter, and the more relevant they'll become. But this is really a big point about trust, but verify. So even when you write down the specs, they have to hit those specs. Now, believe me, if you ask the factory, did you hit the specs? They'll go, yeah, we hit the specs. Don't worry about it. This may be one of those times where they're a little bit more gray in their answers. And then you get the item and you check it and you're like, this is off spec. And they go, oh, yeah, sorry about that. We had a piece of equipment that malfunctioned, or we had some weird thing with the shipment. We'll give you a nickel off your next order. And they just kind of blow it off like it's nothing. Andy, have you seen anything like that before?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add, and you're probably getting around to it, like your instructions to the inspection company have to be crystal clear, because, they have hundreds of employees spread out all throughout the city. And so they're just going to go on the general, inspection template, which is long, about 40 pages, but your product. And so you need to be very clear to that inspector what they need to look for.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And as a matter of fact, the more precise your specifications become, the more customized your inspection reports will become. There's a high correlation to that those specifics as time goes on.
Yeah, I'll add to that if you end up, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. If you end up not giving very clear guidelines to the inspection company, what's going to happen is you're going to get the frustrating inspection report that shows you not a fail, not a pass, but a pending. And that's because they don't know, you didn't give them this, you didn't give that, they weren't sure about this or that, and so they gave it a pending. And then you're like, great, what do I do with this? But if you give them something very detailed where they know what to expect and they know if this specific thing is pass or fail, you're more likely to actually get that specific answer back.
Absolutely right. And listen, starting inspections, if you don't already do them, that's part of the process. There are, more comprehensive inspections. You can do pre-production inspections, like on raw materials. You can do production inspections as it's actually being made. That should only be done as the scale of the business is important enough to rationalize the cost. So for most people, a pre-shipment inspection is kind of the best way to handle it, because the risk is if the stuff ships, then it's a real problem on this side. And if it could be changed or modified, it's easier to catch it in China and deal with it. And I'll tell you one example. This is a number of years ago, but one of our lead inspectors was at the factory, and he stopped 27 containers. 27 containers were off spec, and we rejected them entirely. And the factory had to deal with them, and in that case, we canceled the orders because they just couldn't do it right. But that was 27 containers that they had made. And we had been inspecting along the way, but it's the final part of production that they failed on. And so it's just the nature of the beast. So trust, but verify. And if you don't, then you can have a problem like this. So these guys had in their specs, don't put formaldehyde in my product, but the supplier put formaldehyde in their product. And then 60 Minutes did a little report on them, and you could see when their stock tanked in about 2015, that stock has never recovered since then. From the all-time high, it's 1,079% higher from its all-time high. Here it is, 4 years later, still hasn't recovered, and it's because they trusted but they didn't verify. Any product that has formaldehyde, you should be checking formaldehyde emissions from not just a China side lab, which we do, that is independent outside of the factory, but we also do U.S. labs from time to time as well on an audit basis, a random basis. We don't tell the factory when we're doing these things. And again, we'll talk more about that stuff in China in detail, but the point is trust but verify. Otherwise, you get one of these, right? And look, you're there, you're feeding it the trough, everything's good, and then boom, you get an unexpected China surprise. You should not want a China surprise. Point 6, it always takes longer and it always costs more, especially when you're coming online with a new product or a new factory. This I actually should look up in physics, but this should be a law of physics. It always takes longer and it always costs more if you're developing a new product line. And if you think you're so smart and you're going to cut down this time, and believe me, I've thought I'm going to outsmart the system and I'm going to hack my way to a faster, better, cheaper, forget it. It always takes longer, it costs more. So when you're starting out with a new factory, you're starting out with a new product, give yourself realistic expectations. Because when you don't, you apply too much pressure, not just on yourself, but on the factory and on the team that's responsible for deploying this product. And I tell you, I've learned this lesson again and again. Please don't be unrealistic, because then your suppliers will hate you. And that's not good. It's the opposite of good for those.
Andy, did you ever end up with giant nursing pads because you were a little too hasty?
Yeah, absolutely. So I tell a story. When I first started out, I think I was using our system in inches, and they were thinking in centimeters. And I was importing bamboo reusable nursing pads. They're supposed to be like this size, and when I got them at my door, they were like this size, like the size of basketballs.
I love it. Yeah,
but the best part was they sold out on Amazon, and the reviews. One of the reviews said that they could be used for lots of stuff around the house, like opening jars,
waxing my car.
Yeah, I was going to say, drop cloth for the car, a tent for the kids. Yeah, you can use it for almost anything. Well, again, there's some of these that have the nice serendipitous conclusions, right? And there's been many, many cases. I would even say most cases that the inspection comes back with some sort of issue. 9 times out of 10, those are solvable issues, and we'll accept the shipment anyway with some caveat. But it's the times where we don't think that we can sustain the whatever the issue is, that we have to really push back with the supplier. And because our expectations and specifications should be clear, it's more fair. But I really do think if you somehow think that you're going to defy the laws of physics and you're going to rush this thing through, I think you're setting yourselves up for less than success. I want it to work for you, and I still want it to work for me. I'll be honest. I'm selfish. I wish I could do it faster, better, cheaper. It just doesn't work like that. So please set reasonable expectations, and let's avoid having your factories hate you. Forbes, in 2017, went into great detail about how China really edges the competition when it comes to winning in trade. And it's a great article. If you look for it, it's in 2017, Forbes, China's new way of cheating U.S. firms on trade. It's pretty awesome. And that's another unwanted surprise if you are keeping score at home. Now, we're already position number 6. We're coming up to our last major one. I have a bonus one, maybe 2 for you. The last one is lack of compliance. So what does compliance mean? How does it vary from inspections or specifications? Compliance are the things that help you get across regulatory hurdles or burdens. And some of them are government regulations, and some of them are marketplace regulations or compliance, like Amazon. So if you don't have MSDS sheets for your product and they require them, you're going to have a problem. Nobody's going to want to put that in their third-party warehouse. Nobody's going to want to sell it if they don't know what your MSDS sheets are. If you don't have required testing and certification, things like batteries for chemical composition, if you don't have the right certificate for importing for a Bluetooth license. By the way, in the old days, the factory could get Bluetooth stuff. Now today, that's not the case. You need your own Bluetooth stuff. Anybody who's subverting that, eventually going to get caught. The Bluetooth SIG, Special Interest Group, is based in Bellevue, Washington. And I can tell you some of the guys that work there are all about making sure people start paying for Bluetooth technology that is being used in a significant way.
I have a friend that got flagged on Amazon. So if you don't pay for that, you're not allowed to use the word Bluetooth. You can only use wireless. And if you want to use the word Bluetooth, you have to pay this organization. One thing I wanted to add, and I think, Steve, you'd probably agree, that right now Amazon is the wild, wild west. You know, you kind of sell anything. Most of the time, they're not going to ask you questions. Amazon recently was held liable in a suit where a third-party seller sold something, and there was something happened with a baby or something like that, and the customer sued, and Amazon was also held responsible. And there will be a day when you will probably have to upload your testing or certificates, I imagine, as maybe more of this stuff kind of happens. Right now, that's not necessarily. Right now, I think it's very limited in terms of what will eventually be in the next few years in terms of what you'll need to show Amazon maybe when you put up a product.
I think it's a huge thing, and I can tell you that's going to happen on everything from, if you have batteries or hazardous materials, if you have FDA type products, everything from supplements all the way through to beauty care products. I think insurance, general liability, and product liability will be an increasing requirement. By the way, for those joining us in the China trip, I'll tell you how I save 5 to 8 times lower cost, 500 to 800% lower cost on my product liability than other folks. And it's a super secret, awesome way to do it. Here's some other things to think about. Patent licensing compliance. If you're licensing a patent, how are you dealing with it? Lack of tariff awareness, lack of awareness of duties. Maybe you've never heard of countervailing duties, anti-dumping duties. Many of these things apply to certain products, and you know that by checking the HS code. Your lack of awareness, perhaps, that customs can retroactively enforce collections. So you, as the importer of record, are taking all of the risk. If you're the IOR, importer of record, you have unending 100% complete liability from the time you began importing. And they can take a single shipment and assume that all of those prior shipments were the same, and assuming that thing is out of compliance, it can retroactively apply a fine. And unless you can prove that those shipments were somehow materially different, they can get you all the way back. So it's really, really a dangerous business. And if you have a product that has anti-dumping duties or countervailing duties, I would encourage you to try to negotiate DDP terms with your supplier. Melissa, will you check Catalyst88.com/INCO in lowercase? See if that link comes up. And let me know if it comes up so that I can share that. So also, lack of a continuous import bond. If you're bringing in containers, just get a continuous import bond so that it's not a problem for yourself. Some of these things will be more and more impactful the more and more volume you do. And I want you to be prepared to grow. I want you to be prepared to accelerate and increase your business. Compliance is a really important thing, both on a governmental compliance level, and they change between US, Canada, EU, etc., all the way through to the marketplace compliance. So really, really important stuff. I can't stress it enough. Anything to add on that, Andy or Liran?
No, I think we covered it.
Melissa, what did you find out on that? Catalyst88/INCO. INCO.
I did, well, is it .com or .org?
Catalyst88.com/INCO.
INCO terms.
Yes, okay. Yes.
All right, so try that, Catalyst88.com/INCO, all in lowercase. So a lot of people aren't familiar with INCO terms, and this is essentially the standard terminology we all use. I just use DDP, which means delivered at duty paid. But this Inco spreadsheet just tells you who's responsible for what. So X Works is like, you are responsible for everything. That's literally on the factory dock. Pick it up. They don't want nothing to do with it. All the way down to DDP. That's where everything delivered, duty paid is somebody else's responsibility, not yours. How you manage those, how you understand those can change over time based on different conditions. So there's a free little link for everybody. No opt-in required. Hey, here's a unwelcome surprise. If you bought a certain kind of toothpaste, it had the same thing that antifreeze had in it in your car, which is a nice sweetener, but it's also quite poisonous. So the FDA increased inspections on that, and guess what that means? It was an unwanted China surprise. I don't want you guys to have unwanted China surprises. Even though cats jumping from being scared by cucumbers is hilarious, and really I could spend most of my next 24 hours just watching these videos, I don't want you guys to have to suffer that pain. Because it's hilarious now, but when you're going through it, man, it sucks. Andy, what do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cats are funny? That's your summary?
Yeah. Hey, there's a question in here, and I'm sure we're probably going to get to it. A guy asked someone, JD Mills, how do you deal with tariffs? What are some of you things you guys are doing to deal with them?
All right, so it's a very good question, and this is something certainly that is coming up more and more. So first of all, tariffs are beyond our control. And by the way, if you go to the awesomers.com podcast, I've recorded a series of episodes about these tariffs. It's beyond our control, so don't bother wasting time worrying about it. I'm going to move on to the next slide so you guys don't have to keep watching these cats get surprised. But I'm going to start here. So the first thing you have to do is understand what impact, if any, these tariffs have. Up until now, there's been a bunch of products that have not been impacted. Now, this last round of 10% is going to get pretty much everything as far as I can tell. There's been several rounds that have already been passed thus far. I see JD saying that tariffs are crushing us. So, JD, I'll say this with absolute respect. Your prices weren't high enough to begin with. If this is going to be a game changer for you, you didn't have a high enough price. Selling stuff for no margin doesn't require talent, everybody. And I'm not saying this about JD. I'm saying this about me. It's easy for me to sell something for no margin because it's a screaming deal. We have to find a way to bring in the product and make money, regardless of where you're sourcing. So one thing I can tell you, JD, is you have to look at, if you have high prices, you have to look where your supplier's buying from. See if you can find their entity name, and then you can actually use some services to look up where they're importing their product from. Maybe they're not coming from the same place you're buying, like the same country. 45% just got hit. So JD, if you can explain how that 45% hit you, so far the maximum tariff, well, there's some higher tariffs on steel, but the maximum tariff on most consumer goods is about 25% right now. And I can tell you that the biggest companies are all actively figuring out how to diversify the supply chain. So I was just in Vietnam, and the guys I was hanging out with in the club lounge are people from Home Depot, Bed Bath & Beyond, and other things like that. All of those guys are in Vietnam for the same reason I'm there, to make sure that we have the capability to be diversified. Now, what does this mean? What does it not mean? First, it means we have to be prepared, right? This is just the nature of global trade, is when you have a big economic battle, a macro level battle happening, we are cannon fodder for the most part. And so we just have to figure out how we, move around. And that may mean that we build the product a little bit differently. That may mean we source it a little differently. I'll give you an example. I don't know if this is specific to China, but this is a real life example. If you make a shoe with a rubber sole, it has something like a 6% duty on it. If you make a shoe with a felt sole, it has a 0% duty on it. So one of the smart guys in Oregon, I forget the name of the brand, but you would recognize it if you heard it. They just put a very thin layer of felt on the bottom of their rubber soled tennis shoes. Just to you, they look like the shoes. The felt rubs off, within a week or so. And, it's not like leaving a bunch of garbage around. It just kind of rubs off. But that they engineer around that 6% duty. Now, these tariffs are not duty specific, right? They're applying in these big batches. So you have a few options. One, negotiate with your supplier, get them to take some of the hit. Two, source it somewhere else who's got a cheaper price regardless of where they're from. Three, raise your price to not take the entire margin hit yourself, or some combination of all those things. And I can tell you that the more volumes you do with factories, the more likely they are to cooperate with you in absorbing some of this pain. And we had, in May, when the last round of tariffs hit a bunch of our products, the factories were reaching out to us proactively going, we're going to take half, or we're going to take all. They didn't want us to panic and go move our stuff to Vietnam. And I can say, again, proactively, a lot of people, when they hear me say that, they say, oh, well, that means you're paying too much to begin with. What a fool I am. But I can assure you that we pay market prices, and I'll tell you about how to know if you're paying market prices here in a minute. So we pay market price. Our suppliers are doing that to preserve the business, even if they lose money short term. And the Chinese government, they also have passed a bunch of tariffs, and they're now passing that money out to some of their local people as well. And so some of that money is being supported by their side of the government. But if all else fails, you need to look at alternative sourcing methods or sourcing countries. And again, we're going to cover that in depth when we're in China, because this is a global trading world we live in. So just a quick word on market prices. When you buy something, if you're not getting multiple quotes for multiple suppliers for the same spec, you don't know your market price. You just have a price from a guy. Maybe you got a couple prices from a couple guys, but if you're not comparing apples to apples across different suppliers, even different countries, you don't really know what the market price is. And so there's a certain point that nobody can really make it for cheaper. And ironically, some of the smaller factories with lower overhead can actually give you a better price than the big factories with higher scale. The big factories with higher scale can actually deliver and can do things that the other guys can't, but you may be willing to pay a little bit more. So anyway, that's what market price is for those who don't know. I see some other notes coming in. JD's proactive. He's got a sample coming in from India. That's great. There's a lot of products that are viable in India. Just be aware that in any of these countries, the supply chain is not nearly as well developed as China. And I don't know if I said it on this call, but when I was just in Vietnam, it reminded me of looking back in time, 15, 20 years. That's how Vietnam felt. And the U.S. just put a giant amount of aid, the U.S. aid program, into 9 Vietnamese ports so that they could bring their level of sophistication up to help. So anyway, that's a bunch of stuff. Any other questions that I'm not seeing here, guys?
Yeah, there's several from Martin DeCampo. So I'm going to read them out, and then I'll go back to the first one so you can kind of bundle them together if they're related.
Okay.
He says, it looks like being the importer has no advantages. Should we allow our forwarder to deal with that and have them be the importer? And then he says, sometimes when getting into a product you are not very familiar with and for which you don't have the competitor's product spec sheet, it can get tricky to ask for specs you're not aware of. Any tips on that?
All right, so let's pause for a minute. So first, on the importer, most forwarders, you're still the IOR, even if the forwarder is doing all the work. Very few forwarders want to take on the total liability, although it does exist. In fact, I think Empowery has a couple freight forwarders that they will do a DDP price if you ask them to do it. So is that good for you? Is it not good for you? It depends, right? I wish I could give you, internet marketing guys are always like, hey, speaking absolutes, blah, 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 but it just depends. I would tell you that if your price for DDP and to have to be 100% hands-off is a good one, why not use it? If the price is too high and you need to absorb some of the pain yourself, then you have to make those trades, because at the end of the day, it's about margin. When you don't know the product specs, ask your competitors. Big companies will tell you their specs. If you were trying to buy a backpack that we used in the earlier example, email some of these companies and ask them, hey, what material is this made of? They will tell you more than you think. Get their MSDS sheets that will help you think outside the box. Talk to your suppliers, talk to laboratories as well. Let me see if I can find one of my lab sheets. Melissa, what's another question while I look for that?
Another question is from Harshad Kumar. Can we trust Chinese manufacturers to send stuff directly to Amazon FBA? You want to take that, Liran?
Yeah, I mean, well, I would say that one, it's not a matter of trusting the supplier if you did a proper inspection, and if you have a good communication with the freight forwarder who would alert you if any of the packages are damaged or anything upon arrival in the U.S., then it's not really trusting the supplier. It's doing a proper inspection, making sure you've done your due diligence to make sure that the goods are in the shape you want them, and then yeah, you can send direct to Amazon. If you're sending, a large amount of inventory, you may want to store at a third-party warehouse because of storage fees. But I've sent product direct to Amazon without issues. I think it's just a matter of following some steps to make sure. Also, I think the first time you're dealing with a supplier, you might want it get to a third-party warehouse or to you, just so you have a better sense of what things look like from the supplier. So maybe on the first order, not the best bet, but I don't see any issues with it if you've done inspections.
Yeah, I generally agree with that. Is it possible to send from China directly to Amazon? Absolutely. In general, I prefer, and in the volumes that we do, we prefer to use a staging warehouse. That gives us more flexibility, multi-channel. It also reduces our impact in Amazon, potential for storage fees, which are really high compared to other alternatives. So think about that. Is it possible? Yes. Is it the right decision? I don't know for you. All right. So I found some of my lab stuff. So there's a lab in China called CTI, and this is just one of their things about toys, hardline and toys. And in the back, they have a list of standard tests. I know you guys can't read this, so I'm going to read it to you. But they have a test for football shoes, basketball shoes, athletic shoes. Each of those are different tests. For tennis, volleyball, badminton, football. They have basketball equipment, functional and safety requirement test method, right? They have so many little details. So labs can be a great source of ideation for you when it comes to the types of tests and the types of specifications you should be having a conversation about. So I know it feels overwhelming when I tell you to spec out everything and know every detail. Start with something and move on as you go and get better and better at it. Just commit to knowing that specs are important and that they can't be ignored. All right, Melissa, there's a couple more things I want to get through. Any other showstoppers we need to take right now?
There's several questions, but we can wait until you're done to continue your.
Okay, we're almost going to get into the details of our China trip. I know people are asking about that. So first of all, I want to tell you your landed cost matters. Oh, excuse me. So here's a cat for you first. And all right, so I think most people don't know their landed cost. And here's my proof. Apparently I cut off the source of this, but the reality is that almost 50% of people had a 5 to more than 10% variance on their landed cost. What does landed cost mean? It means the cost it took to move your product from production, which you paid whatever, some set fee for, $4, all the way through to your final cost of goods point. I think most people are not getting this right. So please take the time to understand every single detail. When you get those long container import records and they show every line item, I highly encourage you to enter each line item on your accounts payable statement in the little tiny subheading, for drayage fees and storage fees and this and that, because if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And more people than I care to see are making this mistake. Only 1 to 5% had a lower cost, which I don't even believe those people. I think they're lying. I think if we said how many people lied in the survey, it's that 1 to 5%. Almost everybody has higher costs than they think because they're not doing the math right. So when you think about doing your landed cost, again, factor it in, freight, insurance, every detail. You get a bill for $1,000, $500, whatever it is, break down every line item so you can compare it as time goes on. The first one may not matter to you, but the next one, the next one, the next one will be important. Big picture, we're trying to make a sustainable system here. We need to serve our customers. We need to have adequate products. We need to quantify and be objective about our procurement. And then we need to buy, storage, and distribute all of this stuff. And all along the way, we have to monitor for our own consistency and quality so that we avoid those China cucumber surprises. We don't want them. This is the summary of what we've talked about. If we're not considering the results and needs of all parties, now I'm talking about customers first, suppliers, ourselves, obviously, we're not effectively engineering the outcome that we want. Beware of the yes, and that happens all across Asia. Just to be clear, that's not unique to China. That's all across Asia. And ineffective communication, speaking in idioms, speaking in. I think Martin talked about, we're going to knock this one out of the park. They'll never understand what you're talking about, right? It just doesn't work. The lack of a proper purchasing system doesn't mean software. Just means that you have a system that you go through for checks and balances, and that you can compare what you expected versus what you got. Not defining or poorly defined specifications, you'll learn that lesson one way or the other. I'm telling you, be proactive, learn it faster than the hard way. Without inspections, you're doomed. Really, you're going to have some problem. I could tell you stories of where people didn't do inspections and their entire Christmas was shot. It could have been hundreds of thousands. Instead, it was a nightmare. And underestimating the time and resources required, it always costs more and it always takes longer. And then we either don't think about compliance until it's too late, or it's not enough. And over time, Amazon will be forced to force us to get better. So whatever's happened in the past, and Liran talked about this very smartly, whatever's happened in the past, whatever we've gotten away with in terms of lack of sophistication, it's not going to be that way in the future. And I'm talking about maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 5 years, but over time that will continue to be more and more. All right, so we do have a China trip. Hey, look at that. That slide looks a lot like my background. I pulled this up just to say, just in case you thought I found the only 7 stories where China screwed somebody over, here's a bunch more that I'm just going to show you. This is really, to me, it's not just China pulling a fast one. And I say this again, in aggregate, Chinese people are fine people, but when you're negotiating with a factory, that's your adversary. You must be prepared to go to battle. This is just the reality that we live in. If you don't check it, if you're not verifying it, it's your fault. That's pure and simple. And there's just too many things that have happened over the time that we can't rely on assumptions. We can't rely on anything. We have to be very, very clear about what we want. So here's what I see as the ultimate trip. We're going to Hong Kong. We're going to everybody arrives there. We're going to have fun for a day, and we're going to get to know each other. We're going to start that networking. We'll start with the open questions, but it's all very informal, and we'll be going to some of my favorite places in Hong Kong. Amazing meals, amazing places. If you've never been to Hong Kong, it's going to blow you away. That city is extraordinary. We're going to pop over to Guangzhou via high-speed train, and we're going to stay at the Canton Fair for a couple days. Each person will be able to go out on the Canton Fair. I will go out one day with whoever wants to go with me for 1 hour, and we'll go through a booth or we'll go through an area, and I'll just tell you some of the questions I would ask people. But I'm not going to do that every day because, A, it's impossible for me to do that, and B, what we're trying to do is we're trying to help people build the skills. We want you to learn the right way. So between our pre-meetings and our networking activities, you can ask all the questions you like because I'll be there. Liran will be there. Andy will be there. Melissa might even be there. Oksana will be there. Isabella will be there. So many awesomers will be there. It's going to be great. And you'll have a great time at the Canton Fair. You'll learn a lot. We're then going to fly everybody to the eWoo marketplace. And I know that there's a lot of differing opinions about eWoo. And so I'll just address those head on. Is eWoo relevant to the world? Yes, it is. Is it relevant to you? I don't know yet, but I think it can be. And I'm going to show you a unique approach to eWoo that we take. And it's an approach that big boxes take as well. When I'm there, I routinely run into big box buyers. And that's because they know for eWoo, for commodities, consumer commodities, it's a really good place to go. But just like anywhere else, that doesn't mean it's a slam dunk. You still have to do all those things we've talked about. And then once we finish up in eWoo, we're going to take another bullet train to Shanghai. And we're going to spend one day touring around Shanghai and decompressing and almost debriefing the whole trip and making sure everybody kind of gets it. And you can check out liranandsteve.com if you want to know more. Here's somebody, Jim, he went with me. We took the fear out of China. That's our goal. We want to put a protective bubble around people, take the fear away. If you've never been to China, maybe you're a little intimidated. I know I was before I started going. There's a language barrier. There's a knowledge barrier. It's all foreign, and so it's all scary. And we just Jim says we take the fear away. I'm going to let Liran and Andy jump in here too, but I think this is a huge way to accelerate your business. You can compress the time it takes to get product samples, etc. Don't you guys see this as an acceleration method, Liran?
Yeah, one, absolutely, because if you're thinking about the traditional way of sourcing from here, you're reaching out, like you said, you want to get several, talk to several suppliers, get market prices, get samples. They ship you those samples over here. You wait a week, 10 days, 15 days to get them. You look at the samples, you come back. And so obviously when you're in one place, you can feel, touch the products, touch the samples, have multiple conversations, and you're compressing that time that it would have taken you that, 10 days to a month or whatever period of time where you're just kind of talking to suppliers, going back and forth. The beauty of, to me, walking a trade show versus finding products another way or dealing with sourcing agent or Alibaba or anything else is not just the fact that you can compress time, it's the fact that you can discover products that you would not have otherwise seen. I have a brand new line of products right now that I'm in the process of launching that's as a direct result of discovering a booth, something I wasn't necessarily looking for, but just saw an opportunity, something that caught my eye. That was in April, and now we're actually just putting in the order for those products. Loretta says you don't know what you don't know. So I was just walking around, and this was in April. I saw so many different seasonal opportunities. Like in April, there were products just for like Christmas holiday season that I was walking by that I'd never seen them on Amazon. Never would have thought about this as a product opportunity. But then I saw the product, caught my eye, and I said, wow, this is something a lot of Amazon sellers aren't going after. And it's here, and I can now sort of take advantage of this opportunity. You might not see the next, hoverboard. But although the original hoverboards were 1 year at the Canton Fair before they became really popular, you might not find the next hoverboard, but you may find a product that is not saturated, but has tremendous potential. And I like the discovery. I like doing work ahead of time to kind of know what I want to look for. At the same time, I want to go with my eyes open to really look for opportunities. I saw something that caught my eye. And I think that can happen to you if you are spending the time walking around, having conversations and thinking, creatively. So time savings, the ability to talk to a lot of suppliers, touching, feeling samples. And also in a face-to-face conversation, I can instantly get, better terms than I would have over, Skype or WeChat. For example, 30% upfront, 70% when the goods arrive at port, as opposed to 30 and 70 when the goods ship. That's something that is very low risk for the supplier. And when you're face-to-face, much harder for them to say no. So a lot of advantages, in my opinion, to going to China.
Yep, I quite agree. Andy, I see you have no mute on, so that means you got something to say.
Yeah, no, it's same thing. I actually went for the first time 18 months ago. Liran and I went together. I was always of the mind that, you didn't necessarily have to go. Since that time, 18 months ago, I've gone 2 other times, and I'll always go 2 times a year now. That's how much it helped propel my business forward. All the things that you guys just shared.
Yeah, it's one of those requisite questions, right? Do you have to go? No, you don't have to go. I was about a year before I went to my first time, but I just know that the benefits of going far outweigh the cost now. That's fundamentally the equation you have to run. Is it worth it? Is it worth it? William asked a very pertinent question. He says he's expanding from Amazon into brick and mortar stores, needs to change the packaging, which is a big deal, William. How do you go about including packaging company into your supply chain? So that is part of the process. And I could just tell you there's a lot of packaging places at trade shows like Canton Fair and so forth. So there are many packaging specialty companies that you can work with to do something special or unique. And it's just another part of the supply chain. And if it's an external packager, you start both purchase orders at the same time, and they have to be aligned in terms of delivery times and so forth. But it really is good. Thanks, KG. Appreciate you coming on. And
you can also have potentially, again, depending on cost, you might pay a little more, but you potentially can have your supplier do the sourcing for you for the packaging. I've done it both ways.
Yeah, that is correct. the supplier will absolutely do it for you. And maybe that's even a good way to begin. It really depends on kind of your fundamental requirements. By the way, William, if you haven't already, check out the Empowery Costco Discovery Program. Melissa, maybe you can put that link in. But Empowery has a Costco Discovery Program that you can find out if your product has a shot at Costco. We have one of the top brokers selling over 150 million a year into Costco, and they can give you a quick go, no go. And if they like it, they can even do a more comprehensive look at it. And so anyway, if you're talking about big box, that's a good one to learn about. So in addition to extraordinary networking, which can't be underestimated, the amount of time that you guys get to spend, not just with us, but with each other, it's a huge, huge benefit. And I can tell you firsthand that many relationships are forged over there. And Loretta points out it's like a semi-vacation in some ways, because we get to hang out with cool entrepreneurs, we get to learn, and so it's both collaborative and fun along the way. And it has a business ROI. As you see, Caitlin here, Kat as we call her, she was able to save tons of money on one of these trips because she was able to negotiate with her supplier in a more let's just say informed way. She learned the market prices. She was able to line up the pieces. And I will tell you absolutely, without question, if you show up in China and your supplier, you can meet with your supplier, whether they come to the fair or they come to your hotel or you're able to go to the supplier, you go up way over those other people who are just by email, right? When you are in China, they'll be happy to come to the hotel if they're in a nearby town. But your stock goes up a lot higher when you have that. And Liran already touched on this idea of ideation, as it turns out. Product discovery is something that you can't plan for discovery except the act of discovering. You don't know what you're going to get, but I sound like Forrest Gump there. You just never know what you're going to get. But there have been things that I find there as well, just walking randomly. And I
think if you go with the idea that are there products somewhere in the Canton Fair that could be home run or great opportunities for launching on Amazon? If you go in with the mindset that, ask yourself that question, does that exist? And among the 60,000 booths or however many there are, I think a common sense answer is that there are. Then you just need to go in prepared to be able to go find those opportunities. They exist. Some people will find them, some people won't find them, but they exist. And if you go with that mentality and keep your eyes open, you'll find those opportunities, in my opinion.
It's absolutely true. Fundamentally, I think one of the great deliverables is that people can come away from a trip like this and they can go on their own after that if they wish, right? Sometimes it's better. Frankly, the way we've priced it, it's about the same price if you just go by yourself.
Right.
So it really is extraordinary value. This is not built for anybody to retire off of. This is built just to cover our costs. And I'm talking about, we include the hotels. We include all that transportation inside of China. You have to fly yourself there. You'll pay a translator a couple days in Yiwu. You buy yourself lunch when you're at the shows. But beyond that, also, we're really crazy because you have to buy your own souvenirs. So, just so you know.
Say that, so.
I know. I knew I had to draw the line somewhere. So the reality is this is, as close to an all-inclusive thing that you could get done. And we do raise the price as we get closer because of the realities of things like trains and planes costing more, hotels costing more as the closer we get. And the fact that there's only so much I want to lose. Kimberly asked if we can go to the black fake market. And I don't know that those even exist there, Kimberly. I have
no idea what you're talking about. Yeah. I would never be a part of the counterfeit trade.
Yeah, but we'll absolutely in Shanghai go to an underground fake market. You'll love it. It's I'll give you 5 minutes on how to negotiate, and then you're on your own. It's hilarious. It's amazing. And the minute that they open a little door you never saw was there, and they let you into a back room, and then they won't let you out, you'll know that you have finally been to China.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I could tell you guys all kinds of stories about China. It's really a fun place. One of the things I love about it is that it is far cooler and more advanced and more beautiful and more built than most people really understand or recognize. Even these beautiful pictures, they don't tell the whole story. It is a sight to see. So I guess that's the last slide. Any final words, guys? Loretta knows. She loves it.
Yeah, what I would say is, if you're thinking of going to China, if you think it makes sense for you and your business, one, the cost of this trip, and like Steve said, it would be very close for you to, when you figure out the cost for, we're going to be staying at 5-star hotels, flights within China, trains, all that. It's going to be very, very close to your own cost. But the things that you can't put a price tag on are the relationships you're going to build, the networking that's going to happen, the masterminding at night that's going to happen. You never know what's going to come out of those experiences. The reason why I go to so many events is because I always get one really great thing, usually out of every event that I go to. And along the way, one or two people that I meet along my travels become really important in my future business. And so that is something you cannot put a price tag on. And so I would say, if you have the budget to make the trip, then it's a worthwhile experience. If you have, $5,000 and you want to start your first product, I wouldn't obviously spend it on flying to China. I would use like Alibaba or Global Sources or something else. But yeah, there's lots of benefits outside of just going to China, of going with the group together. And it's the ability to, it's one conversation that you might have with Steve along the way, walking somewhere, or one tip that somebody gives you, or one partnership that might form with two people that happen to be on the trip looking to source a similar product that might change the future course of your business. Obviously, it's up to you to make those networking and conversations happen also. It's, if you sit in the corner not talking to anybody, some of that stuff will not happen. But if you're open, I think we have a really good group so far, the people that have signed up. So I think a lot of really good things are going to come out of this trip. If it's not for you this time, maybe it will be for you next year in April. I wouldn't feel pressure if you're brand new to go, but if you have the budget for it, I think it's a really good experience.
Yeah, I think well said. There's a couple questions I want to just touch on. Martin asked about Alibaba Trade Assurance. He says, can that be a way to protect you when you're dealing with a new supplier? It is a way that you can protect yourself. Suppliers hate dealing with that, so it comes with kind of a little bit of bias from the supplier side. They don't like that stuff. That said, they'll generally agree to it, although they'll usually increase your price a little bit to cover their cost of having to deal with it. But it's certainly not off the table. Most of the time, I'm not worried about a supplier not shipping the product. I mean, I don't know if I've ever had China not ship the product. But I definitely have had China ship something that I didn't think they were going to ship. In other words, it was off spec in some way. Most of the time, those were on me. That's my fault. So I'm not worried about them not shipping the stuff. I'm worried about it not being what you expected it to be. So I'm less worried about trade assurance. And the larger your volume gets, that will not work economically speaking, in my own opinion. Kapil asked for, hey, what's your views on Ewo, quality, perspective, etc.? So I can tell you there's a lot of people who say, well, Ewo is low quality, Canton's high quality. But that's just not the way it is. They all just make products, and they make it to whatever quality the customer wants. So can you find low quality products at Ewo? Absolutely. You can also find low quality products at Canton. Ewo actually has a very large trading area that serves Middle East, Africa, South America. And those are, even India, these are lower end markets. They have to hit a lower price point. So if you say, well, I'm going to buy the same spec that they sell to India or the Middle East and expect to have happy US customers, that's on you. You made that mistake. But if you find a product that has the look or the style or the function that you're looking for, and then you make sure that you have them tweak it and go, well, this hinge that's on there, I don't want it to be plastic, I want it to be metal, or this assembly, the zipper, this whatever. You can adjust any of those criteria in Ewo or Canton or anywhere else for that matter. It's up to you to engineer the quality. So just because you see something doesn't mean it's high or low. It's, it's always the burden. I put it on myself, on the buyer, to make sure that it meets your needs and meets the needs of your customer. Any feedback on that, guys?
No, it sounds good.
No, I take your many years of going to China with a lot of respect. So I'm looking forward to making the visit to Ewo.
Yeah, listen, I could tell you that I can screw up buying anywhere, so let's screw it up together. No, I really,
Join us in, what was it? Poorlymadeinchina.com.
That's right. We're going to go, we're going to
sign
do a
up.
live Poorly Made in China acting out. Yeah.
Yes.
So Loretta's right. You do get what you're willing to pay for. If you try to jam people on price, they'll just engineer the quality down in ways that you never contemplated, because they're way better at that than you are. They can engineer stuff in ways that you never even thought about to lower their costs and increase their margin. I really do want you guys to read that book, Poorly Made in China. I can't tell you what a difference maker is, because I want you guys to be empowered and armed for the battle. This is a battle. As much as they'll throw out the word cooperation or guanxi or any of the rest of it, it's a battle. You got money, they got product, and you need to fight your way to the middle ground. And that's the optimal point, is that middle ground where both people are winning long term. But it's the trust but verify. You have to keep it going. You have to keep it going. So if I think we're down to we're under 10 spots to go in terms of capacity. So if people are looking to go, you should book soon. I don't try to take a big group. This is one of my famous quotes, but the minute it starts feeling like work, I'm going to stop doing it, right? So this is not a moneymaker for me. This is for the love of the game. I really do love entrepreneurs, and I want entrepreneurs to have access to basically as much resources, as much experience as they can have access to. So myself, my China team, some or all of them will be there at various points in the trip, and I will hold nothing back. Liran, how much are you going to hold back? What percentage?
0.0.
All right, so he's holding nothing back. Andy's going to hold something back. What's your percentage, Andy?
And 0.
All right, so we're holding nothing back. Melissa, she's going to be there. Oksana will be there. Isabella will be there. And really, from taking your product, launching your product, making it win on Amazon, you got all the resources you need. It's going to be something that I think we're going to have just a great time And, when I talk about value, I just can't tell you. Loretta, I don't know the final size of the group, because it depends on like how much of my China trip will be there, or my China team. But we're targeting somewhere between 20 and 30 people maximum. 30 is really starting to get outside my comfort zone, I'll be honest. But the most important thing that we're trying to do is deliver something that is unique, meaningful, and that when you walk away, that you're like, holy crap, this is not only did I learn a lot, I had a great time. And every person I've ever taken to China has said those types of things. And I've been taking people to China since 2003. This is not just a new thing. And I don't always do it. So Melissa and Oksana talked me into it this time. So that's the way it goes.
Sorry, not
anyway, any final words of wisdom? Because we've held these guys on here. Everybody who's still with us, we really do appreciate it.
Steve, just before we let everyone go, there's a couple unanswered questions. I want to say real quick, for everyone who's still with us, thank you for sticking with us. And also, any questions that you still have, just put them in the Facebook area. We'll get to those by typing, whatever you call that. Instead of on this webinar while we're still recording. But the last questions, there's one on Facebook here, Steve, that's from Pat Taylor. If I receive a sample and decide it is a golden sample, is it okay to write on the sample and send it back to the supplier to give the pre-shipment inspector so he can make sure the whole order is the same as sample quality?
It is okay, because you have an absence of alternatives. So, if you're down to the point where you think that you're picking a supplier, I would always get at least 2 samples. One that you can have as the master sample for the factory/inspector, because the inspector can just show up and go, bring me the master sample. They get out their inspection form and they kind of do all of the comparisons required. But I've had a case where we only had 1 sample and the factory kind of forged the signature on it. And it was clearly off spec. I mean, there was nothing about that spec it was a color issue, so it was very obvious. And they're like, "Whoa, what are you talking about? We got the master sample right here." And, as I said, I guess I probably maybe doubled down a little too hard that they won't overtly lie to you. But I don't think it's they don't start the relationship with overt lies, but they may end the relationship with overt lies. So that was one. Actually, we had to kill that factory and took them out of the equation, and we rejected the shipment, and that was the way it went. So in the absence of alternatives, that's the best you can do, but don't think that makes you 100% safe. You can ship that sample to your inspector and keep that off-site. One other pro tip: if you guys are paying for your molds, those molds could be signed as well, and I would store those outside of the factory. Find either an inspection company or somebody you can cooperate with to store those molds and only bring them in for production. That way you ensure they're not using the molds for other production that's happening somewhere that you can't see. And it's also important to establish who owns those molds when you're paying for them. And there's a lot more of this kind of detail that we get into in China that we don't pre-prepare a bunch of presentation for China. It's organic, and it's what the people who are there want to talk about. So if you show up and you're like, I talked to this supplier this day, here's what they told me, we'll give you our immediate and direct feedback about that interaction and how it applies and what we would do if we were you. We won't tell you what to do. We'll just say, if we were you in that situation, here's how we would analyze it and start making a decision tree to figure out what's up. So, Liran, any words of wisdom we want to leave everybody with?
No, a lot of really good, valuable information here on importing in general. So really, really valuable stuff. I knew about the signing of the mold, but never heard the storing it off-site. So that's a great tip.
There you go. Yeah. And listen, I got a million of these. And many of them, by the way, I take for granted. I'm like, well, of course, everybody knows that. Right. And that's what happens when you have knowledge. You just kind of like, well, everybody knows this. So there'll be many times I just glance over something and somebody has to back me up and go, wait, what was that thing you were talking about over there? And I'm like, oh, man, I never would have contemplated this not being a fact. Ralph,
I'll be your back me up guy in China.
I love it. Yeah, that is perfect. Price for the China trip is $62.50 for a single visitor, and basically $10,000 if you share a room. So you can get it down pretty cheap. That includes the rooms. I want to be clear. It includes the trains. It includes not the flights to China, but all the food, all the hotels, all in China, Hong Kong transportation, and some fun touristy types of things. You guys can find the schedule at liranandsteve.com. It takes you through every single day, what we're doing, where we're at. I want to say it's 11 days or something like that. It's ridiculously value packed. I mean, honestly, there is no economic basis for this. This is these guys willing to throw their hat in the ring and basically work for free. And me also saying, we'll take on the burden, we'll take on the responsibility. And
if you guys are asking, why are they doing it at a price that doesn't make sense? Like, are we secretly making money and not telling you? The answer is no. The answer is, one, Steve hasn't done the trip this last year, so trying to kind of bring this back together and build up a group. Number one. Number two. We're going to raise the price as it gets closer. And number three, personally, I don't look to make these trips so I can like make a ton of money. I know I want to go to China anyway. This helps cover some of those costs, and I get to do it, with a group of entrepreneurs. So it's kind of a fun thing. It's definitely not one of those things that, like, if I looked at the ROI on just the trip part, I would say, man, that's a great use of my time. But I want to be in China anyway. I think all of us do, and so I think it makes sense for us for those reasons. So when we say that, when I made a post that we were like in the red, and probably still are at this price, it's actually true. So just so you guys know, there's no something hidden behind it.
Yeah, it is all true. And really the motivation to do this is really just to make sure that we are doing the things that Liran said in terms of we're going to be in China. We want to share the experience. But it's something that we truly believe in that can benefit people. And that's just kind of what we do along the way. We want to do the right thing. Melissa, any final questions? Because I don't want to leave anybody high and dry here.
The last two here are, Martin asked how to deal with manufacturers reps who leave their companies. So you have to negotiate all pricing and specs again from scratch. How do you plan ahead to prevent that?
Well, hopefully you don't have to start again from scratch, because you should have something in writing from the prior back and forth. So what Martin brings up is something that happens inevitably. The sales rep, they move from company to company. And so you will inevitably have a sales rep that you're talking to and making progress with, and then they are no longer there. And so I want to be clear that that's not something that's unique or a rare thing. It happens pretty regularly. So your past history of those communications should start you with the next person. And I really can't stress this enough. You should be talking on a video conference, Skype or WeChat or whatever, with your China supplier from time to time. Believe me, they would talk to you 24/7 and monopolize your time. So be judicious about how you do it. But face-to-face communication in even this virtual way is far better than emails and WeChats and so forth back and forth. That face-to-face is where you can start to develop a rapport, a relationship, and ask. It's like, hey, come on, we're 50 cents off here. Give me a break. And it's much higher chance. So talk to them in person. Keep the things in writing. Make sure that even if it's an in-person conversation, that everything is reflected in an email after that. Hey, here's what we just talked about. Here's what we just agreed to. Make sure that that is proactively written down. Again, one of my slides said, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. And so that's one way. Any final ones question, Melissa?
Where do you think the biggest opportunity is for India's supply chain improvement?
Well, India supply chain improvement, that's an open-ended question. So I'll just say this about anybody but China. China's really good at absolute moving product from point A to point B. They're just really good at it. They weren't to start with. They're just really good at it now because the roads are there, the infrastructure's there, the knowledge is there. So on the core logistics of moving products, India still has some work to be done. In terms of the types of products India can do, I think they can do glass products really well, leather products, any handmade types of items, I think they can do reasonably well. It's just with handmade, you have variances that can really, really be wild.
Cut and sew type products.
Yeah.
For India.
Not just cut and sew. I mean, they could be assembly, anything that involves manual labor. If they offer that service, they have the potential to be a value add player. Many times they'll get the components from China, and then they're putting it together and manufacturing in Vietnam or India or wherever. So I'm not sure if I fully understand the question, but China or India has great opportunity to source products, but they also have great opportunity to improve their supply chain logistics as well.
Okay, the last couple of things here are just a couple comments from Radul. Thank you. He says he would rather join you guys than another trip that he mentions because he appreciates that you guys include the hotels. And he says he's supposed to get married October 25th, but he would rather join you guys.
Steve and I, we're turning this website into our wedding registry also after after the trip is done. LiranandSteve.com. We have to use it for something. So, get married in China.
Well, heck, bring your wife to be, and Liran will go on and get online certification. He'll marry you in Hong Kong. Yeah, so
absolutely. As long as we can Facebook Live it.
Yeah, we're full service. So listen, we love entrepreneurs. Thank you guys for sticking with us. I hope this has been valuable. If it has been, let us know, because I will go lock myself away in a room later and go, do they care what I have to say? Did it matter? Am I making sense? Like sometimes I have no idea if this even matters. So let us know. You can put that on Facebook. You can write me a note and deliver by carrier pigeon, but just let us know, because we really want it to be valuable to you guys. All right, Andy, last words.
No, yeah, I definitely highly encourage, if anyone's thinking about it, to go to that website today. This will be the 4th time that I've gone to China in the last 2 years. And I just said earlier, I'm going to go 2 times a year for the foreseeable future. I just went with my family. I brought my entire family for 21 days. It was the absolute best trip we've ever gone on as a family. And actually my kids at the Canton Fair, they found a product that we're working on right now.
Wow.
So, there's very few sellers of that product on Amazon. So we're excited about that.
So I'm showing one of my many Chinese visas, by the way. This is back in 2011, and you see all the stamps from 2011. It is really worthwhile. If you guys have never gone to China and you want to go, come with us. We're going to love it. Oh, Patricia, hey, good. Looking forward to seeing you there, Patricia. By the way, I'm planning, although my kids don't know this, I'm planning on bringing my kids. because my kids and my nephew are going to have their own kids mastermind for Catalyst88. And we're going to be launching this at some point where basically any Empowery members, they'll be able to get their kids in at no cost. Otherwise, it'll be a small nominal cost. But it's where kids can talk about how they do this stuff together. They'll have access to resources and experts that we have either in Empowery and myself and maybe some other parents along the way. But we want kids to have access to this cool, amazing business opportunity too. So I expect to bring my kids to China. They will be happy to carry your luggage for you, even though that's not a promised service. But anything we can do to make them awesome. So, yeah, and I would just tell you, this is going to be an amazing trip. If there's no fake FOMO here. If it doesn't work this time, I'm not sure if we're going to do another one, not because of a lack of desire, because I think we love this stuff and we love hanging out with entrepreneurs. It's just a time thing. I just never know my time. I just landed from Vietnam. In 2.5 weeks, I leave for Europe for 3 weeks, a mix of business and pleasure. I'm back for another 2 weeks, then I have to go to China because I'm an expert witness in a case. And then, by the way, like 3 weeks later, we're in China. And among those other times, I have a few other things I actually have to get done, believe it or not. So my time is ridiculously overcommitted. So thank you, everyone. One and all, I appreciate you guys. Liran and Andy, I'm thrilled to be partnered up with you. Melissa, Oksana, and Isabella, thank you guys as well. And I think that's it for us.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.